This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Mother's Day is almost here, and you can get her the most beautiful time-tested gift around. A watch she can wear every day from Movement. Whether your mom is into classic dress watches, rare and refined ceramics, or tried-and-true bestsellers, Movement has something she'll love. And right now, everything at Movement is up to 50% off site-wide during their Mother's Day sale. A watch is a gift that celebrates all the time you spent with Mom. And a Movement watch is even more than that. Movement uses industry-leading materials for their fresh, modern watch designs, from technically complex ceramics to vintage-inspired style, all for an incredible value your wrist and wallet will both love. And with one-size-fits-all convenience and fast free shipping and returns, it's a stress-free shopping experience. Save big on the best Mother's Day gift ever with Movement. Get up to 50% off site-wide during their Mother's Day sale at mvmt.com. Again, that's up to 50% off at mvmt.com.
We made this.
Back everybody to the X-Cast. As ever, the truth is in here. I'm your host today, Carl Sweeney, and thank you for joining me for this episode of our special Fight the Future Minute podcast. You are listening to our coverage of minute 33 of the film, which begins with the helicopter we first saw in the previous minute, continuing, two helicopters actually, isn't it? Continuing their approach to the cover-up site, and it ends as we see the site's interior and some of the high-tech gear contained within. Couldn't think of a more enticing way to phrase that, but I'm joined by Caredwen Foley. How are you today, Caredwen?
Hi, good thanks. How are you?
Really good, and I'm looking forward to discussing this particular minute. Let's start, first of all, what really struck you about this minute? What did you enjoy the most about it?
I really like that they just totally go for broke in terms of the atmosphere and kind of cinematography. We talked a little bit in the previous minute about that sort of sweeping scene of the helicopters coming in over this dark night sky and over these, suspicious looking tents. But yeah, it's really notable to me how, despite the fact that we've seen lots of really grand cinematic images on this show before, it still manages to kind of up the ante. And the setting is so vast and it's so alien and so anonymous, and watching these black helicopters gradually swoop in, it sort of ups the ante with respect to the threat of it and the menace of this conspiracy.
Yeah, and I think Bowman actually describes it on the commentary as the first real X-Files image of the film. And I guess what he means is that obviously we have the prologue kind of thing with the cavemen and all those Texas scenes. It's kind of a different setting to what we're accustomed to. But yeah, here it's night, government helicopters, and I can see kind of what he means. And this scene of them landing, they take every opportunity, don't they, to kind of show off the scale. I think that at some point, we mentioned in the previous minute that these are fake helicopters. I think they're fake until they're not. So at some point we transition to real helicopters, which land. We've seen that kind of thing on the show, I suppose, from time to time. I think there are helicopters in F. Masculata, for instance, that land. But here they're able to take a bit of time with it. But yeah, just once again, that integration of effects is very well done, isn't it? You wouldn't know unless you were looking for it. I think even then you can't really see the seams.
Yeah, well, and I think that's one thing that, the X-Files always really benefited from in terms of the early seasons, having this quite kind of dark look. You can conceal the edges of things, and you can make things seem much more menacing and frightening because you don't have to show all of the... you don't have to have a perfectly anatomically convincing alien. You just have to have like the suspicion of an alien in a shaded kind of corner of your screen. And it's much more effective and much more frightening than showing too much. But I think that's a really effective aspect of the film here. And it's interesting too to see the helicopters here. When we just watched the helicopters on top of the federal buildings a few scenes earlier, we saw, Michaud standing right next to them, and we've been, grappling with this was a good guy, but he's been used by people who had nefarious purposes. And so to have this, you know, the next point at which we see helicopters in the film be this point of, or I guess we've had the helicopters come and take away the bodies. So, but we see them as this motif coming up again and again at points where there's something shady going on.
Yeah, well, there's something very shady going on here, isn't there? Because this is the first appearance of the cigarette smoking man, of course. William B. Davis, I guess kind of the villain of the piece. He's not traditional, he's not the Moriarty figure here to Holmes or whatever, but he's almost the villain, isn't he? And it's quite a good intro for him.
Yeah, I one thing I really like about how he's revealed here is we were just talking about how like vast and menacing and alien and anonymous this whole landscape is. So then to see this helicopter descend and, interesting, metaphorically go from being, you know, non-existent to being an actual helicopter, even though we don't maybe know that as viewers, and then have it realized even further by having this villain that we know very well step off of that helicopter. I mean, it's a nice reminder that these vast sort of shadowy conspiracies that are run by faceless men are not. They're orchestrated by people with their own motivations, making active decisions. It's kind of like how when the Syndicate went from being this abstraction in the early seasons to being these guys sitting in a room together. I know a lot of people have kind of mixed feelings about the effectiveness of that, but I really like it because I think having the human stakes enter into those conversations and recognizing, it might be a little less frightening, but it's also, it increases for me the dramatic tension of knowing that there are real people making these decisions and they have reasons for them. It's not just some anonymous bureaucracy somewhere. That bureaucracy is made of faces.
Yeah, and we kind of see a bit of that tension in the film, don't we? Because here, I mean, later we'll get the scenes with the Syndicate. They meet in England and so on. But here we get a very elaborately constructed entrance for William B. Davis, don't we? Because he arrives in that helicopter. Obviously, Mark Snow's score is very ominous at this point. We see him get out, and the first thing he does is take out his cigarettes, put one in his mouth as he still stood under the helicopter, which I thought was a nice touch. Then we cut to that over-the-shoulder shot where he lights the cigarette. The score becomes especially foreboding. We also get to see a bit more of the site he's come to visit. And then we get this close-up. He takes a puff. We've got the helicopter blades whirring away in the background, you know. So it's an especially dynamic entrance, isn't it? Ultimately, it ends when he walks out of the frame. It's somewhat reminiscent at this point, I think, of some of the earlier uses of the character, though, isn't it? Where he was a bit more of an ill-defined presence in seasons 1 and 2, for instance, wasn't he? Before the point at which you speak, when we get to learn a bit more about his colleagues and so on.
Yeah.
Here, he's a bit more Darth Vader-ish.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's a scene at the end of Young at Heart where he's credited as like CIA man or something like that. He's not even, you know, we don't even know if it's meant to be the same guy, although I imagine we're at least, you know, it's the suggestion is there. Interrogating John Barnett about this, like, salamander hand regrowing technology or whatever. Yeah. But it's interesting to see, you know, where we think we know what the connections are between the cigarette smoking man and the rest of the Syndicate, to see these kind of fault lines emerging. We've seen them throughout season 4. One of the things I really like, I know that Tunguska and Terma are not, you know, necessarily revered as some of the most effective mythology episodes, but one thing I really like about them is the way they set up the divisions between the well-manicured man and the rest of the Syndicate. And really like position, they like put the pieces in place for the movie in a way that I think the X-Files doesn't always do. It doesn't always like move its players into position for a subsequent payoff. But I really like that we get to see how these kind of contravening priorities and preferences in this group of bureaucrats and conspirators sort of weigh against each other.
Yeah, so speaking of like putting the pieces in place, how well do you think season 5 puts the pieces in place for the film then? Because they were obviously in the curious position of having shot the film, of course, before they made season 5. But there are some elements that it's a shame, for instance, that we don't see Krychek and things like that, isn't it? And they set up some plot points in the end which are kind of held over until the beginning, for instance. Yeah. But it's a very difficult task, isn't it? Because the film has to be positioned for people who haven't seen the series or who are less familiar with the series.
Yeah, I think season 4 does a much better job of setting up the film than season 5 does. I mean, I think it's interesting to note that, those kind of Tunguska Terma payoffs that happen later here. It's like they know that has happened, and they know that Scully's cancer is going to go into remission. Yeah. And those are the kind of things that they can hang the film on at that point, and then say, all right, we're going to have to spin out this whole season. What are we going to do with that? We're going to give Scully a surprise child and then take her away. Mm-hmm. And we're going to bring back, Diana Fowley, and we're going to introduce Gibson Praise. And so, they've really complicated or, introduced some real challenges into the mythology that the film, you're right, doesn't really grapple with at all. And that themselves end up, I mean, the end and the beginning story arc do really carry forward, but it always has bothered me how atomized Christmas Carol and Emily are in the context of the whole story. So it's like they're kind of trying to run out the clock in season 5 before the movie because they know they have these plot points to get to. But I really wish that, I can see why they felt like they needed to introduce some new elements so it wouldn't just feel like they were waiting for things to tick down. But it does really feel like a loss not to have some of those stories explored here. Yeah,
I wonder if it's running down the clock or whether it is an element of somebody like Chris Carter seems very excitable, doesn't he? And he kind of moves from one idea to the next. So, season 4, you see, the Tunguska Terma stuff, or things like the bees, for instance, which are really important in the film. And then by mid-season 5, we're into all the kind of faceless alien rebels and all that kind of thing, aren't we? So I wonder how much that's a factor that he gets an idea, he just kind of grabs it for all it's worth at that point,
Yeah, it seems like the movie in the time stream feels more suited to happening sometime between Redux 2 and Christmas Carol. I mean, it sort of fits for me into that, period of time a little bit more clearly, where in terms of Mulder and Scully's dynamic, in terms of what has happened with the story so far and things like that. It's hard for me to square the second half of season 5 as a prelude to this.
I mean, this minute ends... We talked about the exterior, so we see the helicopters land, we see the Smoking Man arrive, but it ends inside, actually, doesn't it? So the camera takes in some of the equipment that's been amassed at this site. Clearly something quite complicated is going on, I think. Lots of high-tech gear here, it seems.
It's kind of a cool comparison to... I'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to some of the subsequent moments, but it reminds one a bit of the Colony and Endgame, procedures and how those infected characters have to be treated relative to these ones. It also reminds one a little bit of the Alien Autopsy, references that have come up earlier in the series. So this is a very, impressive, very high budget version of those.
Yeah. I mean, just before we go then, I think as we've talked about the Cigarette Smoking Man's introduction, I mean, how well do you think the film does by him? Because I think I mentioned Roger Ebert's review a couple of podcasts ago, and I think one of the things he said was that character was a thankless task, But is he right? I don't know, because he's kind of the villain of the piece, but this film is never going to end with him being kind of taken away in handcuffs, for instance, is he? Do you think the Smoking Man is used well in Back to the Future?
That's a good question. I guess I hadn't considered it that broadly before.
Yeah.
I think his scenes are really effective. I think that having him end the story, sort of having to deal with the crumbling of his previous version of empire and having to set up shop anew in some other country under some other set of kind of guiding principles. I think that stuff all works really well. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like the complexity of having him not ever get to be the villain who gets led away entirely at the end of the film. And I think it invites people into the story more and invites, viewers of the film not to feel like they've gotten a tidy resolution at the end and then to be interested in seeking more. So yeah, I think from that perspective, I like how his character is used. It would feel very cheap, I think, to have a brand new, if they had brought in some high profile movie star to be if Martin Landau had been playing the villain of this piece who then gets brought to justice or killed or whatever at the end, I think that would have felt kind of, too cute.
Yeah. Or if Strughold had been that character, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have this kind of this brand new big bad who then gets dealt with very suddenly. I don't know, that would feel kind of cheap, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he's used pretty well. I wonder if a mainstream audience, they see this scene, they see him get the big build-up, and I wonder if that's what people maybe were expecting, perhaps. I don't know. I think for those of us who know the show, it works much better, perhaps. All right, Caredwen, well, we'll be back next time, won't we? Because in minute 35, the drama at this site continues, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, really looking forward to it. So yeah, this wraps up our latest Fight the Future Minute. Thank you for listening, everyone. Until next time, remember, as always, trust no one.
Previously on the We Made This Network. Free with this month's issue.
And also, I wonder if Tim Harrington and Colin have been in the same room together.
I've still got slightly more hair.
Because you go on some Wikipedia page, and for a moment I thought Colin was wearing a multicoloured feather jacket.
I am. Yeah, I am. Yeah. If you were on a Skype call, you'd see that. But, I'm not in Les Savvy-Fab.
Cinemortuary.
A lot of interesting things with that mechanic, couldn't you? I'm sure the sequels probably play into it. Like, if it's not your turn to die, people just jump out of planes and shit and they're fine.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. That'd be a good one. Yeah.
If
then again, as a character, would you risk that in case it was your turn? In case there's like some information you didn't know about someone else has been saved, therefore it's your go now.
I mean, if I knew it were going to come eventually, I would absolutely get some knuckle listers on and fight my way into the White House just with my fists. Just like, I mean, if you're going to go out anyway, just like man in polo neck charges into White House, takes down 300 Secret Service, shits on Donald Trump's face, and kills him by slamming his head in a drawer.
Life's milestones.
So, what do you think? Are we going to go with compostable, Chris?
I like that as an idea. Oh, there's the Hunter S. Thompson firework idea I quite like as well.
What's that?
He had his ashes loaded into a rocket and just shot up in it as a firework.
Amazing.
Whether that's true or not, that's the legend has it. Anyway.
Well, you get quite a lot of ashes. You could have a firework. You could then have some thrown into your garden, or you could then have some in a necklace for somebody else. You get a lot of ashes, and you don't need a lot of ashes to make.
It's a weird thing. I don't know if I know anyone who's been cremated and then had the ashes. I must do, but I can't imagine having someone's ashes in the house. That feels faintly creepy. I would follow various kind of dog forums on Facebook, and you can get dog ashes. And
I've got my cat's ashes. I've got cat ashes on the mantelpiece.
I can somehow see that more than a fellow human.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.
Have you heard about the 2018 study that showed half of prenatal vitamins tested had unacceptable levels of heavy metals? No? Well, now you have. I'm Kat, mother of 3 and founder of Ritual, the company making traceability the new standard in the supplement industry. I remember staring at my prenatal vitamins and finding all these things I was trying to avoid: high amounts of heavy metals, synthetic colorants, and unnecessary ingredients. So, at 4 months pregnant, I quit my job and started Ritual because I believe that all women deserve to know what they're putting in their bodies and why. I'm so proud of our prenatal vitamin. The ingredients are 100% traceable, it's third-party tested for microbes and heavy metals, and recently received the Purity Award from the Clean Label Project. You see, we trace like a mother because, let's be honest, no one cares quite like a mother. But don't just take my word for it. Trace for yourself with 25% off at ritual.com/prenatal.